Hello, my name is Amara Hark-Weber, and I am a shoemaker. I was supposed to teach at Penland for the fall concentration, and unfortunately, that was canceled. So we are making do with this secondary thing. That's me in my workshop last week. A little slice of my workshop there, just so you can put a face to my voice. And at the bottom is my contact information, my website, my Instagram. Feel free to drop me a line or be in touch. I love to hear from people. So here we go. I started making shoes in 2013. I was an MFA student at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and during my last year, I was in a car accident and I had a serious head injury and neck and upper body injuries. So I made my MFA thesis project called Muscle Memory as a pair of 7 performance shoes that were worn and then displayed, talking about injury and recovery. And when I finished at the Art Institute, I decided that I wanted to try to be a shoemaker as my job, but I needed a little bit more information about how to make shoes before I was able to really take that on. So I decided to go and learn from a boot maker named D.W. Frommer, who makes cowboy boots in Eastern Oregon. He's a fabulous cowboy boot maker, and I chose him because he makes very, very traditional work, all leather, nothing in his workshop from after 1940 or so. And this is a pair of cowboy boots that I made during my first year of boot making. That year, I also received a Jerome Fellowship through Minnesota Center for the Book Arts. Minnesota is where I landed, where my family is from, and that fellowship was really instrumental in helping me establish my workshop, get tools, and really kind of make a workflow that works for me. However, I soon realized that I wanted to do more than make cowboy boots. There wasn't tons of demand for cowboy boots in Minnesota. And so I looked for another maker who could teach me, and I found Janne Melkerson in northern Sweden. So I went to northern Sweden and spent a little bit of time with him to learn more about menswear and also about hand sewing and things associated with a more kind of formal shoe. These are 2 of the pairs of shoes that I made during or after I got back from Janne's. After a couple of years of making shoes, I built up a lot more questions about shoemaking, and so I went to another teacher. This is he. His name is Marcel Mershon. He's a Hungarian gentleman who at the time was living in Georgia, teaching at SCAD, and I learned different construction techniques. So on the left, you can see what's called a Norwegian sewn shoe. What makes it a Norwegian sewn is that there are 3 layers of stitching on the bottom, and each of those layers connects different parts of the internal workings on the shoe. Every time I went to learn from one of my teachers, I tried to take what I learned from them and bring it back into my own workshop and my own aesthetic, which is maybe a little bit more sparse than some of them. This is the same style of shoe, but it's made in my own workshop with my own styling. What I do every day is I make shoes for clients. So I make bespoke shoes for individual people. And the next few slides are just some of that work. What I really love about making bespoke footwear is that I get to know people in a very intimate way, but for a very brief amount of time. So I always hear stories about their bodies, about what brought them to me, about where they're going, what they like, what their dreams for their shoes are, and I get to help make those dreams a reality, which is really, really fun. I really enjoy it. This is a pair of shoes that a woman had something similar to, but wanted a couple of changes on. Right now, I'm still meeting and making shoes for clients. This is a pair that left the workshop in this August. It's a pair of cordovan shoes, hand-sewn double monk with brass hardware from Japan and matching belt. This is the detail of the toe plate, brass toe plate. A lot of the work is very traditional. You've seen a couple cap toe Oxfords. Doesn't get more classic than that. And chukka boot here on the left. But I get to put my own twist and spin on things frequently. This is a pair of elastic side boots, one of my favorite footwear to make and also to wear. This is made with a rough out equine leather and silk pull in the back. I also get to do just some really fun pairs. So these are all from last year. I tend to get orders in waves of color, which I guess I was going through a gray wave at the time. On the left is a pair of a pair of monk straps out of ostrich, and then an Adelaide style in the center, and a pair of elastic side boots again out of stingray. These are my boots. They are great. People always ask about what my shoes are. These are a pair of my boots. And this is another pair of mine. I think they're really cool. I love wearing them, and that spongy bottom is really comfortable because the floors of the workshop are all cement, so it feels like a sneaker, but it looks stylish. This is the last pair of boots that left the workshop. They left last weekend. It's a pair of boots, full welted. This is just a little bit about the process of what I do. So when I make shoes, some people assume that I'm buying components, but I'm not. I'm making every piece of everything from start to finish, starting with the foot. Well, I don't make the foot, of course, of the client, but with the measurements, I take their measurements. I apply them to a last, which is the form that you see in the middle. It's what shoes are made out of. I fit the last to their measurements and then build all of the components from scratch. Hand sewing the outsole. You can see on the left there's a little detail of hand stitching. And then that shoe when it's complete in the workshop. Messy workshop, clean shoes. And then the latest thing that I'm doing now is I have my own last design. This is a shoe tree, so it's going to be a bespoke shoe tree for a bespoke last. I really love lasts, and so this has been really a pleasurable thing to work on over the last year or so. So I thought I'd give you a really quick tour of my workshop since we can do that. This is the front door. My workshop is underground, and on the left or on the right, you can see that that's insole and outsole leather, and then a couple of cutting machines. I have an upcoming order for blue alligator, so that's that alligator hanging up there, and then some of my stock leathers. Moving over to the left, there is my work table. It's where I do flat work. In the front, you can see a pair of fit models. That's just for a client to try to make sure that the last fits their feet. Here are some samples of shoes. You may recognize a pair from the slides previous. On the ceiling are my lasts. These are upcoming orders for clients. Moving into the actual workspace, these are a couple of Gigantor sewing machines. And then some smaller sewing machines. And in the front there is a skiving machine used to bevel the edges of leather. My workshop is underground, so there's a little window there in my business table. And then in the back is where I spend a really lot of time sitting and lasting. So on the wall there you can see there are edge irons and other hand tools. There's knives, there's mini hammers, awls. There I am. Hello, hello, hello. And then finally, we have the finishing machine. And so this is just, basically a gigantic belt sander that I use to do the work. The last thing that I do is that I teach. This is from the first shoemaking class that I taught at Penland. I think it was 2017, but I'm not totally sure. It may have been before or after then. And in this class, the students were amazing, worked so hard, and they measured their feet, built their lasts, made their shoes, every design is totally their own. They did all of the work in 2 weeks. It is astounding. No one in the class had made shoes before, so it was really a pleasure to do. Also a little bit stressful, but mostly really wonderful. And that's what I have. So thank you so much to Penland for facilitating the slide night, and to all of the viewers. It's really been a wonderful part of my life to be a part of Penland as a visitor, teacher, student. It's always a gift to go to Penland, and I just want to say thank you so much for all that you do for the artists and craftsmen here. Um, Thanks so much. Feel free to be in touch, and signing off.
Hello, Penland. My name is Ben Carter. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Thank you all for coming to our digital slides. I appreciate Penland asking me to teach and look forward to talking with you today about my work. I'm going to talk about my work as a potter, podcaster, and teacher. So I think of those as three facets of my career. If you'd like to see additional slides, you can check out my work at carterpottery.com. I'm based in Howell, New Jersey, where I live with my wife, Melissa, who is teaching at a local university here. The work I'm going to talk about started in 2011 when I went to the Pukaja homeland, which is an indigenous area of Australia. It's an autonomous region called the APY lands, and there's an art center called Ernabella Arts. I went there to work with the men. I was making pots like this here that Jejuna decorated, and I was going down to essentially make pots that are almost like a canvas for them to draw on and to paint on. In exchange, I was learning about jerkapa, which is this word up here. Now, what that means is sometimes you'll hear it called the dreaming or the storylines. They are a mythic structure of storytelling that connects the Central Desert region. Now, if you are Ananu, which is the Pitjantjatjara word for people, if you are a part of that language group, each person has a jerkapa. It is a family story. And you can see here by this line of emu tracks that Jejuna drew on this pot, that's his family jerkapa. And so you're almost born into a sense of aesthetics based on where you live and how your family sort of relates to the land around them. So while I was down there, I've been back, I think, 5 times or so. Usually I go for 2 weeks or 2 months. It kind of depends on the funding and how it all works out. But I would be talking to my friends, and they would be telling me about what they did over the weekend, and they would say, we went hunting and we were doing this, and then the malu, which is the word for kangaroo, they would say the malu told me to do this. And the first time I heard this, I said, wait, okay, back up, explain this to me. How did a kangaroo tell you something? And they said, oh, no, I mean the malu in me, like the spirit in me. And I realized what they were talking about is that they were not distinguishing between animals and themselves, and then also between the land and the animals in themselves. So this is just a simple drawing that explains that cosmology. Now, having said that, this is an outsider's perspective. If you ask an on a new person, they might describe their cosmology totally differently. But when I came back from these trips, I started thinking about what's my cosmology? Like, what's the thing that explains my place in the world relative to land? So I started thinking about the human desire to create structure in nature. And on the left here, you can see kudzu. You can actually see this is a cabin that's buried under there. And this describes where I'm from. I'm from Southwest Virginia, from the Roanoke area. So, red clay soil and a lot of kudzu and humidity. So if you think about this is almost a sense of nature overcoming any human desire for control. If you look to the right, though, that's Versailles. That's the palace at Versailles. And those gardens are an example of human structuring nature so it grows exactly where they want it to grow and it blooms in a way that they want it to bloom. So you get maximum color, maximum pop. So I started thinking about that. Like, if these are points on a spectrum between not a lot of human interaction and more human interaction, how could this way of thinking about human relationships with the land, how could that could describe me, like my experience? So I made up this formula almost, and this is a metaphor that I think about where the natural world becomes the aesthetic world through human interaction. So first, let's imagine that you have a flower that's growing in a thicket. So this would be when you're walking along a path out in the forest. If you're hiking, you might see a flower that no one planted that. It's just growing there because it has enough light, it has enough water, it has enough nutrients, and it's just naturally occurring. Then what we've done is we've taken those flowers out of the thickets, and when I say we, I mean the sort of cultural practice of domesticating flora. And once you take the flower out of the thicket, then you get to the garden. And with the garden, again, gardens are all about, it's about human control, but it's about manifesting beauty. Now, if you move one step farther, you get the field, and no longer is it about beauty, it's about being able to put out as much output as possible with the littlest amount of human interaction. Now, the final step that actually takes the natural world and puts it into the world of aesthetics is when we create patterns or images. So I made bodies of work to represent this idea over the course of, I think, probably 5 or 6 years. This is the Thicket series. So this is red clay with just a white slip. And then the only color on these pots was the blooms. And this is to represent that sense of discovery. When you're walking in the forest, like I mentioned, and you see that flower, it's always pleasing to me. I'm always like, oh, how did that grow there? Like how did this come to be here? So I wanted that sense of discovery when you're turning the pot around as you're using it. This is the garden series. So the math of these pots is much tighter. The patterns themselves are tighter. And I looked a lot at Islamic pots, specifically Iznik ware from Turkey in the 1500s, very much reminiscent of that ware. But I also think about this true to the way we think about gardens. We want the brightest flowers. So all of these flowers are depicted in their maximum bloom. This is the field series. So this is drawings of tobacco that are made with stippling. So it's lots and lots of little dots. I thought process wise, there was an interesting correlation between the process of stipple drawing and the biological necessity to plant things in rows, so that you can get the maximum output. And being in Penland, you guys have probably even seen tobacco fields in North Carolina. I went to school at Appalachian State up in Boone, and I always think about, you'd be driving through the mountains and you would just come across a small family farm growing tobacco that was a part of their livelihood. Now, this is the pattern series. So, you guys will probably relate to patterns and pattern making if you're an artist. That teapot on the bottom right, that's mums, like blue chrysanthemums. And that is aligned in a way that makes them polka dots. So, this is not only my idea, this is sort of the history of ceramics, the history of pattern making. And I've just broken it down into these different segments. After finishing those 4 different bodies of work, I thought a lot about what I was the most interested in that project, and the garden series was really interesting to me, so I've jumped back into that. This is probably the last 2 years worth of work, and I'm trying to teach myself how to use different colors, still pushing myself to make fluid brushwork, to have an actively engaged surface of a pot. I fire everything to low temperatures. This is all terracotta pottery. So if I don't put the energy into the brushwork, the kiln doesn't give me any energy. It's all about having a lively touch with the brush. Also, thinking a lot about color. So I've given myself assignments like, how do I use the color orange? Because orange is something that can be a bit confusing visually to me, or pink. So this is one of those pots where I use that. And then here's an example of where the work's been going lately, where I'm also using sprigs. So the pattern's coming off the surface of the pot. I wanted to wrap up talking about my podcast. I go around and teach a lot of workshops. So I interview artists in their studios about their life. And actually, in COVID, I'm doing a lot of Zoom interviews these days. I sit down for conversations. They're about an hour. And what I'm trying to do is to basically get to the heart of what a person's creative impulse is. So, for instance, someone like Virgil Ortiz, who's on the bottom right here, he has helped to enliven the ceramic tradition in the Coche de Pueblo, which is outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And his impulse is to, to make art, to be a maker, but he is also very interested in carrying on the history of the Pueblo revolt to the artists that are younger than him. So you guys, if you don't know about it, you should look up the Pueblo revolt. Virgil has actually written a sci-fi epic drawing on his love of Star Wars and the actual history of the Pueblo revolt, mix those together into a full-length movie script that he talks about with the artist in Cochiti. So this project is half about expression, but it's also about carrying a history that has been intentionally whitewashed out of basically the classrooms of New Mexico. So it's really interesting to talk to him about that impulse and what's important to him. I also talk to a ton of potters. I'm a potter at heart. So when I'm talking to Linda Christensen about her experience wood firing, we talk about the nuts and bolts of what it's like to deal with the inner critic, like how to deal with your inner voice that may or may not treat you kindly. So I definitely recommend that you guys check out those 2 episodes. There are 340 episodes, so there's plenty of listening to do. But the bigger point I want to make is that if we don't record our history, it often goes unremembered. And our field in ceramics and the field of craft as a whole, we have so many wonderful people that are creating change in their communities. And I think of it as my job to go out and talk to them about their work in their own voice. I love art critics and gallerists, but to be honest with you, I don't love them as much as the artist. I really like to hear artists talk about their lives and their creativity in their own voice. Like, I think that's the most powerful example of connecting with another human being. If you guys would like to keep in touch, you can do that through my website, which is carterpottery.com. You can also check out talesofredclayrambler.com. I'm also on all sorts of social media under Carter Pottery, so Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So thank you guys for taking the time to listen to this, and I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in Penland next year.
Hello, my name's Jen Elek. I'm going to be presenting work today by myself as well as my husband, Jeremy Bert. Jeremy and I met when we were at Alfred University as freshman foundation students, earning our BFA. Jeremy studied ceramics and neon. Here he is in the clay mixing studio where he did his work study. He was interested in slip casting clay. Here's a slip cast piece that was then manipulated after molding. This is some early work of Jeremy, some panel paintings that he created using found objects recycled, as well as some hand-formed neon colorful tubes. Jeremy had a great propensity for two-dimensional rendering, which has really come in handy in our neon business. Here's an image of our home studio in South Seattle where we currently reside. We have a ceramic shop where we do slip casting. We have a neon studio where Jeremy repairs tubes for the industry as well as creates his own work, and also a metal fabrication studio. And this is some examples of the colorful slipcast work that we like to make. Moving from Alfred to Seattle, Alfred was such a conceptually based program focusing on ideas that I really enjoyed coming to Seattle and being around so many expert craftspeople that I begin interested in the craft of furnace blowing glass. Here are some examples of some of the pieces that I made in the late 90s after moving to Seattle in 95. One of the objects I enjoy making most in functional glass is the oval platter, where a plate is singular in its shape. An oval platter is inherently the shape of sharing, something used when we're going to share food with other people. Jeremy and I enjoy the natural areas of the Pacific Northwest, especially opportunities to forage wild edible mushrooms. This love has inspired me to teach a series of classes with my friend Annette Blair from Australia entitled Eating Your Way Through Design. We have taught 2 classes at the Pilchuck Glass School, where we forage and create menu items, fresh and local, and create glasswares in the effort of having a feast at the end of the class. Really fun. Here's some images of Jeremy's sign truck. Jeremy works as a sign electrician. He uses some of the materials that are cast off from the industry to create his own work. Here's one of the first pieces he made using these materials, called the Ransom Note. It currently resides at the Shack Art Center in Everett, Washington. This is part of Jeremy's beer sign series. It's a fun series where he corrects it to be more truthful to what the product really does. This is a show entitled The Human Factor. After living and working in Seattle for a few years, working at studios like Chihuly Studios, Sonia Blumenthal, Josiah McElhaney, and Nancy Callan, and as a fabricator at Spiral Arts, creating glassblowing equipment, I decided to go back into using the material more sculpturally. Cutting, gluing, cold fabrication, mold blowing, to create objects more of greater scale. Offhand bit working, projecting light through objects to create a ghost forest. Creating parts, cutting and polishing, and then picking them back up on a malleable bubble to create surfaces of varied texture, smooth and stiff, contrast. Soft surfacing with powders. Here's one of the early paintings that I created using some of the materials from Jeremy's signage industry work. This piece was looking at the predatory nature of commercial advertising, focusing on young children. This is a show that Jeremy did using some of the channel letters from the industry. It was particularly engaging with young folks. They seemed to have a special relationship with light and language and shape. Here's some images of Jeremy's work when he's reclaiming some of the sign faces, the plastic sign faces, harvesting light bulbs and sockets. This is a target he created out of the reclaimed sign faces that now resides on the top of our garage in South Seattle, greeting folks as they land in airplanes close by. A reworked Payless shoe store sign with more positive messaging. In 2002, I began working for the maestro Lino Tagliapietra. I worked with Lino for 15 years as his bench assistant, affording the opportunity to see the master at work. I feel a great responsibility for all that I have learned with Lino and intend to pass on the information to the students that I encounter. While working for Lino, I got to work on fabricating custom metal tools, burner molds that he would lay the glass on to shape into birds and other blown sculptural object forms. At times, I would work as an independent contractor at the Chihuly studio, making armatures for the glass to hang on. I learned so much there, many talented artists working in the mock-up area, and inspired me to look more towards collaborating my metalworking skills with my glass. The result is the Signals show, my first solo show at the Traver Gallery in Tacoma in 2009. This is a series of steel panels that have glass melted on it, chromed steel surfaces, blinking lights. It's a growing series. I make a panel every couple years. The reflective surfaces are meant to engage the viewer, to actually include the viewer in the painting. It reflects words that are written backwards and can only be seen correctly in the reflection. This is the most complete showing that I have had of signals at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. This is also part of the Signal series, a piece entitled Blanket. It has a steel armature in the back with 3 panels and blown glass capsules mounted on it to create a sort of blanket or textile of colorful glass. A smaller piece from the series entitled Favorite. My welding experience helped me to be inspired to develop a new way of sculpting glass inside the annealing oven, where I take each piece and blow it one by one. I bonk it off and hot torch it and combine it together to make a sculptural object. Here is a picture of the process. I have the oven at an elevated temperature so that it softens the glass and becomes more malleable, allowing me to weld the pieces together. It's a fun process that I like to do with classes when I travel teaching workshops. Jeremy and I were invited to have a collaborative show together at the Traver Gallery in 2012, entitled Look, See. In the background, Jeremy has a reworked Blockbuster video sign to ask the question, look, see? Here's some O's that Jeremy transformed into flowers. A series of mine entitled Hugs. Moving away from actually welding and connecting the pieces, I began to create pieces that were measured and modular so that they perfectly fit together. The dimensions are about 28 inches long by 8 inches wide. Another modular sculptural series called Trees. I love the beautiful opaque colors of glass. This piece is entitled Transient Light Graffiti and shows the progression of Jeremy using the channel letters. Now these letters are all removable from the wall and allow the viewer to wear them and move around the gallery spelling words or phrases. They're rechargeable and have 8 hours of charge. A wonderful way to engage people in work. This show was picked up by the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, allowing us to expand on our collaborative work and to create more experiential shows, engaging the viewer in landscapes of light, form, and color. We enjoyed the many opportunities for reflections on the vitrines. A few years back, Jeremy and I were invited to teach a spring concentration at Penland. The class investigated the relationship with glass and light, starting with a historical model, the lace maker lamp, that magnifies candlelight. Here's an example of the finished piece of the lace maker lamp I made during that time. The class also looks and explores an LED as well as neon and how it can be used in glass. Here's another example of the work that we made at that time. We also had the opportunity to work in private commissions. A more recent show of mine at the Pilchuck Glass School entitled Visual Fun. And you can see how the signals panels have evolved, sometimes not even having a metal background. I'm using the clear glass to become invisible and really showcase the faces on the cups. Another piece from the Visual Fun series uses colorful polka dots to help define the form that becomes invisible using clear glass. One of the things Jeremy and I have enjoyed practicing with our more recent classes is open shutter photography and light in motion. It's something we hope to expand on in our next few collaborative classes. This piece is representational of my most recent body of work entitled Native Species, simple line work of species that are in my local area. And this last piece is Jeremy's most recent work entitled Unity Circles. This piece will be exhibited in a show I am curating at the Traver Gallery in October entitled Bigs and Smalls, a Greek neon show featuring many talented artists working in the medium. Please check it out if you have the opportunity. Thank you so much for this chance to share our work with you. We really appreciate the time. Thank you.